Good afternoon and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. I wonder if members of the panel would like to introduce themselves, please. Councillor Zaman.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Councillor Hadidan Zaman, Councillor Buckley.
Minutes of previous meeting have been circulated. Do we agree that they're a true record of the meeting? The panel agree that? Yeah?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got just a couple of updates. At minute 28, public question time, the officers undertook to give a written response to the question that was posed by a member of the public, and this has also been shared with members of this committee. The response that we received to the question, do you intend to identify those areas of the district that are already suffering from high levels of pollution and high levels of hospitalisation of people with respiratory issues? And if so, once identified, what plans do you have to influence any increase in those pollution levels in specific areas, for example, schools, Chamber, Whitechapel Road? The answer that was sent was, we are legally required to monitor air quality across the district, and this work is reported annually within our annual status report submitted to DEFRA in line with legal requirements. Information on our air quality action plan and our annually submitted status report can be found on the website. Kirklees Council currently monitors and benchmarks against health-related objectives in many parts of the district, and they actively work with public health and active travel colleagues to ensure work is targeted within areas of high pollution or where there is congestion contributing to high levels of vehicle-related pollution. When areas are identified to be exceeding health-related objectives, the Council declare air quality management areas and create an action plan to address the issues. We have identified 9 such areas across the district and undertake monitoring within these areas and in other parts of the district. To the second question that was asked, what is your vision in terms of ensuring that this district never sees a case like Ella Adu Kissi Deborah, the young girl that had air pollution named as a cause of death? The reply was, the Ella Adu Kissi Deborah death is very sad, and we in Kirklees never want to see a death attributed to air quality anywhere, let alone within Kirklees, which is why we work very hard locally and regionally with businesses, anchor institutions and the public to ensure intervention plans are in place. We also proactively monitor air quality across Kirklees and take action in areas where air quality levels are higher. Notwithstanding the above, Kirklees air quality levels are significantly better than in some places in London where Ella lived. Further to the above, air quality interventions such as education, modal shift and encouraging active travel and promoting public health are ingrained in our service priorities. We recognise the importance of air quality education and awareness campaigns linked with active travel initiatives and supported by effective air quality monitoring. Will we use this information and these interventions to promote actions which contribute to improved air quality, which residents and businesses can contribute to? Kirklees also recognises this is not just a local issue and has led on regional air quality projects and continues to do so. Recently, we have overseen the revision of the West Yorkshire Low Emission Strategy and have coordinated funding on low emissions air quality projects across West Yorkshire. That is the end of the written response that was sent. On minute 29, the air quality status report that was referred to has been written and submitted to DEFRA, but not yet ratified. So once ratified and feedback has been provided, an update will be provided to Scrutiny. So there may be some areas in that response as well that you wish to ask at that time as to when they come back with the air quality status report. Okay, that's the updates on the minutes, and I would just like to also mention that there has, since the last Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, as you know, there has been a call in, and the Economy and Neighbourhoods panel was the panel that listened to that call-in, and the decision has been published on the Kirklees website, and the Cabinet report that has been referred back to Cabinet is on the agenda for the 16th of November Cabinet. Okay, all right. So are there any interests to declare?
None.
Oh, no, okay. And the meeting is open to the public and is being webcast live. And of course, the recording will also be able to be viewed after the meeting. Deputations and petitions, we've had no deputations and petitions, and public questions, we've had no public questions that have been submitted. So we move on to item 7. The draft strategic intelligence assessment for Kirklees and the community's partnership plan, and we have officers here to go through that with us. I believe there's a presentation, so can I hand over to Jill Greenfield, I think, who's going to introduce this, and can officers please introduce themselves as they speak? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Jill Greenfield, Service Director for Communities and Customers. I'll just introduce you quickly to our colleagues who are going to help go through this item today. Go to Chris.
Hi, it's Chris Walsh. I'm Performance Intelligence Lead for Communities.
And Shani.
I'm Shani Mortimer. I'm the Service Manager for Domestic Abuse and Safeguarding Partnerships.
And over to our partnership colleague who's kindly joined us today as well, Alan.
Yeah, good afternoon. Chief Inspector Alan Travis from the police at Kirklees. I'm in charge of neighbourhood policing and partnership working over here at Kirklees.
Thank you. So, as Councillors Major outlined, we're here today to give you an update and for consultation and an early view from Scrutiny.
Jill, can I just quickly interrupt you that we also have Councillor Carol Patterson?
Sorry, Councillor Patterson, force of habit to not introduce as officers. Over to you.
No, it's all right. That's my fault because I said I didn't. I was going to let you introduce the item, which I will do. But yes, I'm here as well in support of the item, and I'm Councillor Carol Patterson, and I'm a Cabinet member responsible for communities. Thank you, Liz.
Okay, off you go, Jill. There you go.
Thank you. So what we want to do today is we're going to share a presentation with you. That we'll do by magic now, that will outline an overview of our strategic impact assessment, the draft partnership plan themes. We will provide some opportunities for questions. If possible, it would be good to cover those at the questions at the end once we've covered all the areas on the presentation. And we've also included 3 additional areas as requested around repeat victimisation, violence and domestic abuse. I do just want to give a little bit of a caveat here in terms of some of the operational detail we may not be able to cover today because unfortunately 2 key members who have been officers who lead on that detail are unable to join us today but because of illness and some planned leave, but we will undertake any detail that panel request back and find those answers. I just wanted to put that out there. So if I hand over to Chris, who will then go through some of the background work to the strategic impact assessment, which I know you've had with the report.
Can I just check if people can see the slide okay?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
you can see
right,
it.
right. Thank you. Okay, so so if I for some reason there we go. Right, okay, so in terms of the partnership plan then, the partnerships that's within it have become a lot broader, from being very crime specific to being around preventing harms. The outgoing plan has got 4 major themes that's within it, that's outlined on the slide that you can see. What we're going to talk about today is the emerging plans moving forward, but also we're going to concentrate on the intelligence that's emerging from the multi-agency assessment that's covered through the strategic assessment. So in terms of what the strategic assessment is, it brings together multi-agency data from a variety of different agencies, such as the police, council, housing, alongside perceptions, other research, to identify what some of the key risks and threats are for the community's partnership. It uses a combination of qualitative and quantitative analysis to identify some of the shared themes in relation to crime, fear of crime, antisocial behaviour and risk and harm. A draft copy is attached onto the papers, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out 3 particular themes that's from that. So the first one that I want to talk about is the impact of COVID and lockdown measures in relation to partnership working. So there has been decreases in crime in a number of areas. For example, property crime such as burglary has seen significant, around about 50% reductions because of that increased informal surveillance, because of more people being at home. There's also been other areas where there's been less opportunities. So, for example, retail theft and the nighttime economy being closed has meant that there's been less opportunities there. Hence, there's been reductions in that. Having said that, there's also been increases in other areas. Cyber crimes being an example of that, such as fraud, online stalking, and then other things like fly tipping and personal antisocial behaviour, in particular things like neighbour disputes. The second thing that's is flagged up here is about the ways of working. So remote working across different partner agencies has meant that some of the issues has been a little bit more difficult to spot. For example, when schools were closed, there was a reduction in some of the things like channel referrals over that period. And also there was probably one of the issues of things like the personal antisocial behaviour was issues not being addressed on the doorstep, and more people at home to be creating some of those issues. And the third one that we've got on there is about the impact on individuals and communities. So we did see at the start of the lockdown process that big increase in volunteering, both at an individual level and through community groups, although some of that has returned to normality there. Mental health does seem to be a recurring issue that is flagged up in the strategic assessment. The second of the 3 is about the disproportionate impact, and that's been separated into the who, where and why. So in terms of the who, the last 18 months has disproportionately impacted on individuals, some individuals and families. Negative coping impacts has been around. The second one that we've got there is about the where, so disadvantaged communities seeing, particularly in some of the more deprived areas, often seeing some of the higher levels of the community safety issues. And then in terms of the when, we have the strategic assessment certainly does pick up on some of the seasonal peaks that's seen in the year, antisocial behaviour, for example, through things like nuisance motorcycles, and also through the day, such as alcohol-related antisocial behaviour and violence. In terms of the third one, that's just the highlight from the strategic assessment, this is about kind of looking forward, really, and it's about some of the uncertainty and the, we don't know where things are going to be. So the first one that's flagged up is about economic uncertainty. Traditionally, where there's economic downturn, it usually sees an increase in things like property crimes, particularly in disadvantaged areas. However, it's fair to say it's unprecedented circumstances, and that might mean that there's an increase in rowdy behaviour with the perceived freedoms that's in place now. The second one that's picked up there is about changed lifestyles, so more people working at home. I mean, one of the things that we've seen is that burglary has reduced and has continued to be at a lower level, certainly in the period that's reported on the strategic assessment. But just to flag up again, there are those continued issues about mental and physical health. The final one there that's picked up there is about tensions, and tensions being broader. So when the strategic assessment talks about that, there's areas as well as the traditional areas that you might see about things like climate change, challenges to authority, and particularly with the threat of possible further restrictions and economic pressures. So that's some of the real core key messages in terms of the strategic assessment. I want to hand over to Jill now to pick up on some of the emerging themes that's been identified. Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Chris. This is really the culmination of the work from the community partners who support the community board and contribute to all of those cross-cutting areas that we already work on. But it's also taken into account all the learning that we've been able to take from the pandemic and how important those relationships are in terms of being able to provide a really good strategic approach to the community partnership plan. So in terms of the strategic objectives, we've got 4 key themes that we're proposing, and this doesn't really give justice to the amount of mapping and reviewing of the existing work that is already in place, in fairness. And those 4 themes, as you can see there, are the leading themes around tackling violence, abuse and exploitation, reducing reoffending, ASB and neighbourhood crime, building resilient communities and reducing risk. And again, underpinning principles there that we've tried to make sure are really clear are our whole approach around prevention and early prevention, partnership, making sure that we're tackling inequality, making sure we keep victim centred and making sure that that lived experience is really clear. I think in terms of if we move on to the next slide, we'll see that under each proposed themes, you will be able to see the work stream areas underneath that. So as we can see there, under the tackling violence and abuse, we have domestic abuse, exploitation, modern day slavery. So under each proposed theme, there is a significant amount of work, task groups, and work streams that sit under there. And again, just moving forward, because you'll have seen that, we can see onto the next slide the same again under the next 2 themes around reducing risk and building resilient communities. And under the reducing risk, there is a new emerging priority around the water safety, which is the reducing the risk of drowning. In terms of those proposed themes, I think it's really important, as we can see here, that there is a real focus on building on that partnership collaboration where we can actually reduce any duplication and make the most of our resources across the whole partnership, and actually make sure that each of those themes are really supported by really concrete implementation and action plans led by strategies as well. And there on that slide, we've just outlined some of those. So the work we're doing around reducing serious violence against women and girls, and we have continually done work, but there is a new focus and intention upon that work we're doing at the moment. The ASB review, the domestic abuse strategy, and the exploitation and reducing youth violence. And there's also some core themes, as we've said, that really underpin and wrap together everything that we're really trying to do here. And that's really important because the cross-cutting nature of crime and disorder really lends itself to having this partnership approach that actually picks up the themes but makes sure that we've got some really tangible actions that underpin those proposed themes, so that we can actually we can see where we are making a difference and where we need to do more. I'm just not aware. I'm looking to Chris to give me a little nod on the time, but this has also been developed within our general approaches and principles around early prevention, and really trying to identify issues so that we can really involve our partnership in that problem solving. I think you will have seen this before in terms of our general approach, but I did wonder at this point as we just come to the end there before we open up for questions, whether Councillor Patterson wanted to make any comment on there. I can see a hand above there at that point before opening up.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Excuse me. I just want to emphasise some of the things about the strategic assessment and our new community plan going forward. I mean, what I hope this plan does, perhaps more than any has done in the past, and that's not a criticism in any shape or form, but it reflects, I think, as well, our new and reinvigorated, I think, partnership working, is that the strategic assessment and the partnership plan reflect, as has been said, reflect the life as our communities experience it. They should recognise what's in that plan, what that strategic assessment is telling them. It should reflect their lives, and I think some of the new priorities that we're looking at this year certainly do that, because life changes, doesn't it? And so it should. But more importantly, I think it's definitely changed over the last couple of years as a result of COVID, and it won't go back to where it was before necessarily. So I'm really pleased to see the emphasis now in our themes on the resilience of our communities, because I think that makes a big difference to how people get involved in crime, how we tackle crime, how we respond to crime. That resilience of our communities is vital, I think. I think we do need to look at risk and identify the risks that our communities face, and to reduce those, obviously. I think we do need to look at repeat criminality, whatever that is, be it domestic abuse or burglary or whatever. You know, what are the fundamentals underneath all of that, that mean that there is this repeat criminality, and then obviously perhaps more important, well, people might recognise this more than anything, though, but reducing violence and abuse in our society. We don't want to live with that, do we? So all of, I mean, everything that's been described so far, they're all cross-cutting issues. No one issue can stand on its own. And therefore, I'm really pleased that at the same time as embarking on our new community plan with this intelligence assessment, that we're also reinvigorating our community partnership, and looking at these issues in a more cross-cutting way than perhaps we have done in the past. So that's the only things that I just wanted to emphasise from what Jill and Chris have already said. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll open it up for questions then now from members of the panel. Do any members of the panel have any questions? Councillor Uppal.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously, having looked at the presentation and the papers, you know, there's some good stuff there, and the stuff that we're saying around early intervention and prevention is obviously really, really important. I don't think we've always got that right, to be honest, previously. So, you know, it'd be really good to see how that progresses. One of the concerns for me has been around tackling serious violence. So as a ward councillor in Ashborough ward, we have struggled with quite serious violence incidents involving firearm discharges as well. And for me, as a ward councillor, I've many times I felt like I've had to really push a response from all partners, to be honest. And I would like to see a much more serious response very early on with these incidents, and also see it followed through longer term. So whereas when something happens, I'm usually chasing up a response for it, and then we might do one or two things that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's lots of stuff going on and there's things that I can't be told about. I appreciate that. But I don't get a feel of that long-term sort of partnership response. As a ward councillor, I don't always know what's going on, and I don't always feel informed either. And I can't see that I can't always see that early intervention and prevention work. So the words are good, absolutely. I just want to see more of that follow through, and it might be happening, but I can't see it. So I've definitely had some concerns then. I think there's been an inconsistency of some communication, and definitely not understanding where that early intervention is happening and where the involvement at a neighbourhood and grassroots level, that feels a little bit behind for me at the moment. So I really want to see some progress on that. I've got to be honest. So I'll just say that for now.
Thank you. Who wants to come in and answer those points?
Shall I start that again? Lacking some of the operational detail, but I think in terms of the serious violence and the new serious violence duty, I think that's going to give us a real opportunity, Councillor Uppal, to really embed that grassroots approach. And I do note your concerns about actually being aware of things, but actually seeing that longer term follow up to what some of those serious violence incidents are indicating, and making sure that is a joined up approach. As part of that serious violence duty, we will be producing a strategic assessment and developing a strategy, and I think that's something we can very much keep in mind and would want to, because it absolutely, referring back to Councillor Patterson's words at the start, it has to make a difference to real people's lives as they live them, doesn't it?
Yeah. Can I come back quickly? Is that all right, Councillor Mitch? So
yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that's what's got to happen. I also note in the report, obviously, there has been concerns about the increase of serious violence crime, but also around gangs and drugs. Now, obviously, the report also says that's reduced during 2020. I know that COVID has had some response, but more recently, we've, I can't talk about the levels overall, but there have been some reported incidents more recently again. So, I am just concerned about the other thing I just wanted to ask about the public health, taking a public health approach to serious violence. You've got the West Yorkshire Serious Violence Reduction Unit. Now, my understanding that's been in place for some time rather than it being a new initiative. So I guess I'd just like to understand, has that been in place for some time, and have you seen progress in that approach, or are you saying actually that's still a new thing that needs embedding?
I think it's been if I can answer that, it has been around for a while, that public health approach, most definitely. And I think what we're taking from this is how we can embed that further, again, embedding the learning from the pandemic. So I think it's a reinvigoration of that approach. And I think the serious violence duty also gives us more impetus to bring that into scope. And I know Head of Service Joe Richmond and colleagues have been establishing what is currently in place in Kirklees, and how we connect all that up to make sure we're making the most of those resources. So in short, I think it is a bit of both. It has been around, but we do need to take that to the next step, and I think we've got some enablers to help us do that.
Okay, Councillor Marchinson.
Yeah, thanks everybody for the presentation, and it follows on from what Harpreet's saying. Yeah, obviously serious violent crime, serious violence, appreciate that on the new duty, but mine, I'm looking at page 66 and the domestic abuse and repeat incidents. There's no absolute figures there, but it looks like repeat incidents are running at 50, nearly 50%. And historically, there's been some really good partnership work in Kirklees and West Yorkshire, primarily led by West Yorkshire Police, but with partnership involving reducing repeat incidents of domestic violence, particularly through evidence gathering, supporting victims who are not particularly confident about giving evidence or testimony against an abusive person who they might know and be quite close to. And there was some real, historically there's been really good work. It'd just be interesting to know. I know it might be a bit more operational, but to hear how changes in operation or changes in partnership working are being are working to reduce particularly repeat incidents of domestic abuse.
Jill, are you going to come in?
I'll start and then I'll hand over to Chris and Shani for some of the data and more operational issues. So yeah, it is of great concern to us around how we respond and we identify and respond to domestic abuse as is a national priority that we've seen, unfortunately, tragically at the moment. We have the revised work we have around the strategy and that partnership work and the new duty. And I'll bring Shani in to talk about some of the operational issues, particularly our place-based partnerships, to try and improve that identification. But before I do that, if Chris, would you be able to just talk a little bit to the data? Because as Councillor Marshington has pointed out, it is really important that we understand what that data is telling us to inform our responses.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, and it's a complex picture, really, some of the repeat incidents, and the appendix refers to some of this. But if I just make 2 points really about that, I mean, the first is that in relation to domestic abuse particularly, it's highly likely that any first incident that is recorded is unlikely to be the first incident that's experienced. The research says that it's usually about 40 incidents before somebody comes forward, and a number of years as well, or that's over a number of years. However, the second point that I think is important there is that an increase in repeat incidents doesn't necessarily mean that incidents are getting worse due to a lack of support for the victim. It can be to do with, and we've got targets around seeing an increase in incidents being a positive thing. And so it can be something where an increase can be a sign of more victim confidence, that somebody's coming forward, they're keeping you informed about it. I think there's more research that we need to do to get to the bottom of that. But perhaps if I hand over to Shani, if she's got anything to add in terms of the work that's going on in that area.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Just in terms of the data, I think it's just worth pointing out, as Chris said, some of the issues around repeat incidents are in fact due to improved victim confidence. And I think it's also worth pointing out that our local police are really have been recognised nationally in terms of their crime recording. So as when a single person discloses a number of crimes that have occurred through sort of a domestic violence incident or an ongoing pattern of a domestic abusive behaviour, police will record a number of separate crimes. And then if there is a sort of a further thing, it can look like we have a really significant repeat rate when actually it's just the efficiency in terms of making sure we're capturing all of those crimes. So it's just important to kind of highlight some of the, like as Chris says, it's a complex picture in terms of data. But I also just wanted to point to some operational processes that have recently been implemented that seem to be having an impact on keeping victims on board in terms of supporting police action and therefore reducing further repeat incidents. So we've got our police work really closely with Pennine Domestic Abuse Partnership around supporting victims through the criminal process, and particularly one newer initiative is around victims that are kind of wavering in their support for criminal action and now sort of routinely being contacted through Pennine Domestic Abuse Partnership just to see if there's any support that they need to continue with supporting that criminal action, or if they're not comfortable going down that route, supporting victims to pursue kind of civil orders and things through family courts if that's something that they're more comfortable with. So I think our partnership response is strong. It is just, as been highlighted, a kind of national concern around domestic abuse repeat incidents, and I think particularly in light of the delays in court systems and with the Crown Prosecution Service as well, leading to quite long kind of bail dates and things like that that are having a real impact on victim safety.
Councillor Marchington, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks for that. And it's always interesting to hear what you're doing, and I think I particularly appreciate the detail about, there might be a lot of incidents before somebody's confident enough to report, and actually that richer picture of support for victims and other approaches, and actually civil approaches as well. That's great. It just would be really good if, I don't know if I've missed it, but to look at some absolute figures, to know how many thousands or hundreds of incidents we've got, just to give us a bit of a flavour about what the percentages mean. So if they're not in the report today, if somebody could sort of email those through at some stage, that'd be appreciated. But thanks for that update on the work that's going on. Thanks, Liz.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Zaman.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. My question is around the tension monitoring that we receive on a weekly basis, which is like a partnership document. On page 45 and 46, you've identified a number of issues that you've been reporting on. Now, my question is that how is this data being used? Because we don't sort of see any evidence or any actions on that template to say what is being done. And apart from flagging up those issues, which really they are a bit outdated by the time we receive that document, that what actions are you actually taking, and how relevant is that document, once it comes out to us? Because a lot of that information is already in the media, or it's already on social media, Facebook, WhatsApp. Communities are already involved in those discussions. So in terms of like that you've identified, like the protests, the by-election, you've talked about speeding cars and so on. So, how do we, ensure that those actions are relevant to our communities that are taking place? Because we don't get those updates on that. It's on the template you identify whether it's lower level, high level, whatever. But would it be useful to have a column that tells us that action?
So, Jill, are you going to come in?
Well, I'll hand over to our colleague Alan, who will be able to talk in depth around the partnership approach that we have at Bronze and other initiatives to this, and pick up anything else that need to, if that's okay.
Yeah, certainly, that's not a problem. So, yeah, I chair a weekly meeting, Councillor, every Monday, which is a partnership meeting that obviously I chair from a police perspective, but has a wide range of representatives from the local authority, Safe for Kirklees, the community tension team, the cohesion team, education, etc., etc. And the standing agenda item on that meeting is the community tensions and the current document, where we have a full debrief of each of the current outstanding community tensions and discuss a partnership plan in relation to those and any actions that we need to agree to manage them. I will certainly take on board your feedback and look if we need to alter that document to provide some more feedback to you as councillors as to what's going on. I do know there is an update on there with a brief couple of lines, but if you feel that could be more significant, then we'll certainly take that feedback on board. For anything of any real significance, such as Bratley Grammar School or the elections, we do tend to set up bespoke partnership meetings just to look at those as single issues, which again are attended by a wide range of partners with a full action plan in place to monitor those. So you have my reassurance that there's some very tight grip around it, but I'll take on board your feedback around the communication and recording of actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask anybody who's coming in for the next item, please, to keep your cameras off until we get to your item? Thank you. Can I just pick up on that point, because what I'm sort of hearing is a theme of councillors not feeling involved. And when you talk about having partnership meetings, do those partnership meetings actually include the ward councillors for the areas that are being discussed? Is there any structure in place that actually enables ward councillors to be able to input to action plans, etc., for their area? Now, there used to be, but I'm wanting to know if there is any at the moment, and are there any plans for any in the future? Because I think this is a theme that we're hearing today, that councillors are not being involved as they feel they could be.
I can come in briefly, Jill, if you want. Certainly in relation to the meeting that I just mentioned, that there isn't councillor Smash, obviously that would probably involve inviting at least one representative, if not numerous, from each of the ward areas across the district, which would make it unmanageable. I know from your smile that you're probably referring to neighbourhood management groups and similar, and it's probably going outside the scope of this meeting, but I know I have had conversations with Joe Richmond as to how we introduce something similar to those back into the agenda, because I know they were very popular with a lot of councillors, or how we can potentially involve councillors more in the community outcome groups, which, as you'll know, will be more sort of place-based stuff, and allow you to have your feedback through those forums, which I think either of those would provide some better lines of communication for you all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pattison, you wanted to come in on this?
Yes, thanks. I was just going to say that the Community Partnership Board itself, I mean, it does have council representation on it, mainly from they're representing their subgroups, but it is cross-party on there. But that's at a strategic level. I don't think that's actually what you're talking about. And of course, the meeting that Alan chairs, I mean, is a very operational meeting where, I mean, people there go away and they actually implement something that, as a result of discussing the issues there. So yes, I was going to say you're obviously talking about NMGs, and Jill and Chris will have heard me many times say I really regret that they don't exist. And I do hope, well, we have discussed that with Jill as to what we can introduce, because certainly that area-based knowledge that members have is very useful. But I think at the moment, unfortunately, none of the meetings or structures that we've got are really relevant enough to actually take that on board. But as Jill and Chris have said, the community services actually is looking at how we can reintroduce something like that. Thank you.
I was referring to NMGs. You're absolutely right. And but in relation to some of the items that you have in this report, you've got place priorities, which are from the place-based work that's happened. Well, some areas have had that and some areas haven't, and it's the NMGs allowed priorities to be and tasks to be set for an area as a whole, and that's why I was asking those questions as well. Jill, you wanted to come in?
Yes, please, Chair. Just really briefly, I mean, we do have, I mean, despite the work that has been described that we are trying to develop at the moment to make sure that's more consistent and involves ward members more appropriately, more effectively, we do have regular briefings with ward members. The community safety officers have quarterly meetings where there is an intervention and challenge. We do try to involve ward councillors where we can. Sometimes that is limited at the time by either interfering with the legal processes or safeguarding processes. But we do try to make sure that the input from ward councillors is taken into account where we're able to do that. But again, I do take the points that we can improve on that. But I did just want to flag that there are routes that we are already doing, but it is about improvement.
Yeah, and I think our points are that there is room for improvement. Councillor Uppal.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think some of it's been said now, but I guess I just wanted to sort of add my frustration, I think, at a local level, and I think, obviously Councillor Patterson's recognised this as well. It's just that there's definitely a gap in terms of some of these very serious incidents that can happen, which are geographical based. I mean, I know what you're saying about these groups that you have, Alan, and that you wouldn't want you know, councillors from all over the place turning up, but where they're more specifically geographically focused as well, you know, I don't see why there isn't actually at that early point why councillors wouldn't be involved. Actually, you know, there's potentially a lot of good knowledge here. There's that understanding on the ground, which at the moment I just feel is really missing. I know from examples at other local authority areas, one of the things they do when things, you know, sort of serious situations do happen that are more geographical based, they will do these partnership bronze command meetings together. So, and within those, you'll have the local authority, you'll have the police, you'll have the ward councillors, you'll have community leaders all together working on those issues. And by working together, you know yourself, don't you, that someone in the community saying something compared to a you know, police officer or someone from the council will have a different reaction. There's no doubt about that. And I want to see more of that agency. You know, when we're talking about really serious issues, I feel really frustrated because some of the stuff that's going on in my ward is really serious and it's affecting really young people. You know, and I want to see that agency around that, and I can't quite see it at the moment.
Okay, who wants to come back? Is that Alan that wants to come back on that?
Yeah, no, I'll absolutely take that feedback on board, Councillor Uppal. As Jill says, occasionally there are reasons why we can't always involve people if there's ongoing operations, etc. But I will certainly take that feedback on board because I do recognise it's an area we can improve on. Thank you.
Can I ask some questions then about burglaries and trends in burglaries? In your document, you are showing, and forgive me if I mispronounce it, is it Iguanta family positions figures? And you've got Wakefield and Calderdale and Kirklees in there, but you don't have Leeds and Bradford. And I'd like to know why you're not showing Leeds and Bradford in these figures as well, because certainly for some parts of Kirklees, what is happening in Leeds and Bradford impacts into Kirklees and vice versa. And I just haven't got a feeling from your strategy how you're working across those borders in West Yorkshire and beyond, because let's face it, some of us are surrounded by motorway junctions in Kirklees. And so I'm not really seeing a picture of how crime is being tackled in some parts of Kirklees from this. Thank you.
Am I okay to answer that one there, Councillor?
Yeah.
And can I do that in two parts, please? So the first part is the question about the Iquanta family. So the Iquanta family is a national benchmarking system which puts areas together based on similar socioeconomic characteristics, and therefore they should theoretically have similar levels of crime. And so Leeds and Bradford are in a different family because they're far bigger areas and we're seen to be, the ones that we're in with are ones that seem to be similar to ourselves, comparing like with like, if you like. So that's the reason why those areas aren't in the same family as Kirklees. The other point that you raised, though, it was about, I'm picking up as cross-border issues, and it's really key, is that because in a lot of parts of the district, the cross-border issue to do with vehicle crime, to do with burglary, to do with more county lines issues as well is a really important one. And so it's really critical that Kirklees is working with, the areas that surround it to pick that up. So that's how I would answer that one.
Yeah, but that's what I'm not getting from I'm not getting from this document how you've done that in the past, or where it needs to be done, or whether you're going to do it, or I'm just not getting that from the document, and I'm wondering why, basically.
Okay, Go on, Alan.
Come in, Chris. So obviously, from an investigative perspective and a police perspective, Councillor, I can reassure you that that cross-border investigation is joined up. Without getting too tactical, we have sort of what we call cross-border burglary meetings where all of the different districts come together. That is more from sort of an investigative, preventative disruption perspective. I think we'll take on your feedback around how, I suppose, our local partnership plan joins up with the partnership plans of the other districts, because I don't know, Chris, whether you have access to the other district partnership plans, or if not, whether it would be an action for us to get hold of those and just check that there is some correlation and crossover between them in areas like burglary where there is that cross-border offending.
Okay, thanks. Chris, did you want to come back?
I was just going to say that work tends to happen with what's now the Mayor's office. To look at across borders. I think it could be strengthened though.
Yeah, I think my point is crime in Kirklees is affected and vice versa, cross-border. And as you say, county lines as well. And in this assessment of crime, certainly some of it didn't feel as if you were describing parts of Kirklees at all. It felt as if parts of Kirklees didn't have that descriptive in there as to the types of crime that could be happening, because you don't mention anything about those cross borders. Councillor Zaman, you wanted to come in?
Yes, Councillor Smith. I just wanted to ask Alan a question in terms of communication with councillors. Now, previously, when there was any incidents that took place within our area, we would get a call from yourselves, and that was like transparent, with myself and my colleagues. But that seems to have changed since like personnel have changed. Is there any particular reason why that's not happening anymore?
No, certainly not, Councillor. It should be happening exactly that way, or if not by a call, then certainly by an email. And if that's not happening, I will take that feedback to the inspector. I do know I get copied into the 6 weekly councillor updates that get sent out, so I know they're happening. I invite all of you as councillors to bi-monthly briefings that I give personally to cover issues in your area and some more strategic type police stuff, which obviously you're all more than welcome to attend. So I am content there is a lot of communication ongoing, but if you're telling me that that needs tightening up, then I'll certainly take that feedback on board and pass it back to the local team. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Now you mentioned the Mayor's office, Chris. And you know how I read these. I do read the reports you send me through. There is an item on page 38. There's a paragraph there that I really didn't understand, and I just want clarity on this. So you're saying that there is a survey that goes out regularly to establish local priorities. Although the monthly postal survey was suspended in March 2020, which I can understand why that was suspended. But you're saying that the Mayor's office undertake those surveys. Now, the Mayor's office didn't exist in March 2020. So who did those surveys previously, and how have they been used to help inform how crime is tackled in Kirklees? Okay, because your paragraph doesn't make sense, but if you can answer those questions, thanks.
Okay, so in terms of who did the surveys previously, it was the Office for the Police and Crime Commissioner. It was the combined authority that then did the survey. So if I've got the terminology muddled up there in terms of the timing, then that's my error, is that. But that's the survey that we're referring to. And like I say, the survey was done online as opposed to postal. It's thought that did have an impact actually on the results in terms of them being slightly more negative. In terms of how those results have been used, previously what happened when the Office for the Police and Crime Commissioner did those was they were done on a quarterly basis, and it was probably the only measure that we had of perceptions on a quarterly basis that we were able to track. And so they were used to get a feel for where perceptions were changing at a district level, really. The size of the sample meant that we couldn't do it at a ward level, but that's how they've been used essentially. They're looking to start redoing that on a quarterly basis. We only had results for the strategic assessment on an annual basis for that particular area, but that's in a nutshell how they've been used previously.
Okay, thanks. I just didn't know whether it was worth circulating that information being available for councillors as well, you know, when it is available, so that we can see how trends are going. But I wanted to move on as well to alcohol and drugs. You say in the in your report, page 58, that drug-related deaths have sadly increased both nationally and locally. But in relation to alcohol-specific mortality is significantly worse in Kirklees. And I just wondered how the drug and alcohol issues are going to be I won't say tackled, but actually stepped up to address the mortality issues that are clearly happening in Kirklees. It does mention that the difference between male and females in relation to alcohol misuse, and it mentions about mental health. And I thought it was interesting. One point was more females who went to treatment for alcohol misuse reported a mental health need compared to males. And I thought that was interesting because pre-COVID, I can remember the health and social care panel at one point being given information that actually there was more severe mental health between certain age groups in males rather than females, and that this now seems to be the converse. So I'm wondering how you're working with colleagues across partners to address the drug and alcohol situation. Jill?
I'll start in terms of what operational work we've got in place at the moment and the direction in which we're aiming to take this, because it is an area that needs some more focus and importance. And the Head of Communities, Joe Richmond, has set up a drug and alcohol strategic partnership and is starting to pull that multi-agency partnership together. We've also flagged some of the gaps to our partners. Again, we're wanting to adopt that public health approach. I think a lot of our work is delivered through our partners on this area as well. And I think again that's something that we need to, that we are acutely aware of post-pandemic has also started to increase and is an issue that we're responding to. And also again the interdependencies with the rest of the priorities that we've flagged around the partnership plan. But in terms of the data, I wouldn't, if I can just ask Chris to explain a little bit about the data that you've referenced.
Thank
you. Was there a particular part of the data that you were talking about there?
So it's what's on page 58 I was referring to.
So in relation to that, was that the Kirklees information about, I must apologise, the document I've got hasn't got page numbers on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry,
okay.
It's page 58 of our papers. I'm sorry. So it's about drugs and alcohol, and it's saying that drugs-related deaths have increased both locally and nationally. But on the alcohol, it's saying our mortality is significantly worse in Kirklees than the national figures.
Yeah, so those two pieces of information were taken from a recent profile that was undertaken in that area. In terms of some of the more underlying detail to that, we'd probably have to come back to you in relation to that there. It's still a draft, is that, and so we'll probably just need to enhance some of that in terms of the detail on that. I don't know the more in-depth to that, if I'm open with you.
That's fine. Councillor Rappel.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to move on to another point on the section on prevent, which is in the report. So you talk about the national threat level and you talk about significant threats to national security. Now, I don't know if this has all come from sort of what's fed in nationally, but it mentions national security threat from Daesh and Al-Qaeda, and it mentions extreme right-wing groups. But then it goes on about also increasing concerns with other causes with no particular ideology, for example, environmental protests. So I did just want to ask, is it right in one sentence to say that's the significant threats around national security are Daesh, Al-Qaeda, extreme right-wing groups and environmental protests I've mentioned in there? And because it's all sort of in one sentence, I don't think that's quite right thing to do, to be honest. I appreciate there are concerns, and nationally there might be some context around this, around climate change and the rest, but to conflate the two, and I don't think that's what you're doing. You've said, for example, I just find it a bit strange that that's all been put in one. And I would want to say there's a difference between protest and obviously serious threat from terrorism. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, sorry, this is on a different point, which is around modern day slavery. And you mentioned in the report, it talks about the different spikes there's been around modern day slavery offences in Kirklees. And you said part of the spikes might be connected to either recording of historic cases or because the result of targeted operations. And I just wanted to ask about December 2019 in the graph, because there's actually quite a big spike then. And I was just wondering if you're able to say what happened then. Is that in relation to a targeted operation, or is it around sort of recording of historic cases? Because it really does spike quite a bit at that date.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look at the scale on that particular chart, because it's quite low numbers that we're talking about. But certainly there was a phenomenon that was the two that you've talked about there, Councillor Uppal, and the third one was certainly over the COVID period. What we saw was where some of the visits that some of the officers were making to business premises did uncover some modern day slavery, kind of concerns really, and that was fed through. In terms of the specifics around the December one, I've not got that information in front of me in terms of whether that was a historic or whether that was a targeted operation, but it would be one of the two of those.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions here, but if I could just follow up. I mean, if that is in relation to visits to businesses, for example, potentially we might be uncovering something here quite serious. So I'm just wondering what sort of follow-up work is sort of ongoing around that.
So in relation to where cases will be picked up, they will be put through to the national referral mechanism. They will be followed up around that.
I can come in further if you like, Chris. So yeah, I don't have the fine detail of the data either, Councillor. Sorry, I can get you that and come back to you, but it will almost certainly be down to a specific police operation. Obviously, I'd say 90% of modern day slavery offences that are recorded are almost like discovered by us and partners when we do specific operations around businesses. And obviously, whenever we do specific operations around businesses or other premises, they are always partnership operations. We have a variety of statutory partners and charities with us that support victims of modern day slavery. And as Chris says, there is the National Referral Mechanism, which is the national response that gives them a full package of support around housing, protection, safeguarding once they are discovered to be victims of modern day slavery. So they are extensively planned operations with a full suite of support around them.
Are we concerned about specific sectors here in Kirklees when it comes to modern day slavery?
There are some specific sectors that tend to be more problematic than others. Bed factories, for example, tend to suffer from this type of business, but it is quite, well, not widespread, but it's not just specifically down to one type of business.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Right, I just have one more little small point to make. Councillor Paul, did you have a further point? No, okay. Because my questions on Monday slavery have just been answered as well. And then I think we'll close the item. So on fly tipping, you're very much concentrating on reporting of issues and enhancements and clearing the items, and absolutely nothing said on enforcement. Now, I take it that is because the council's enforcement really doesn't happen as much as it should, rather than the fact that there's been no enforcement, because I think a lot of places would question the word sometimes before rural locations, because some of our experience is that the fly tipping happens in the rural locations where they can't be seen, rather than more in the areas where they're overlooked. So, but there's nothing about enforcement in here on fly tipping. And I'd like to know whether the council is actually going to be doing more enforcement in relation to fly tipping. Okay, Chris?
I think on that one, in the report, you've picked out an area that needs to be enhanced there in terms of getting that to provide that additional context. So let me have a word with the appropriate department and get some thinking on that, just so we can make sure that that's coming out a bit more strongly. Okay,
thank you. Right then, so Scrutiny are asked, do we feel that the priorities that have been outlined to us today, do we feel that they are correct in terms of the strategy? Are we in agreement with those priorities?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I'm in agreement, but
yes,
you know what my concerns are. So
yeah. So I've picked up concerns. Let me just run through them, and if I've missed any, please let me know. So early intervention, more visibility of partnership working at ward level, ward councillor involvement far more, including on action plans. Domestic abuse, we asked for absolute figures to show how what the percentages mean. The tension monitoring, we asked about the documents and how that can be improved, and because it is out of date when we get it, it's already been the information has already been in different forms of media. We mentioned about feeling out of touch for ward councillors, that general theme. Involve far more. Undertook to look at how ward councillors can be involved far more and setting priorities locally. Is there any that's missing that I've missed? No, everybody's okay with that, yeah? Okay, thank you ever so much for your attendance today, for your time, and if you could let us have the information that's promised as a follow-up, that would be really good if you could let us have that as quickly as possible. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right then, we'll move on to item 8 then, and thank you for patiently waiting for us. This is the development of Kirklees voluntary community and social enterprise investment strategy, and I'm not sure who's going to start this off. Noreen, if you could introduce yourselves, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. So my name's Noreen Impasse and I'm the Community Investment Manager and leading on this piece. I have, because it is a joint piece of work, I have partners and colleagues joining me today. If they'd like to introduce themselves. Diane, you're at the top, is that okay?
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm Engagement Communications Lead for Democracy and Place-Based Working.
Helen?
Oh, Helen, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. There's always one, isn't there? Sorry. Helen Orlick. I worked in the voluntary and community sector in Kirklees for the last 13, 14 years. Most recently as chief exec of a local charity there. And then for the last 9 months, I've been working freelance, and I was commissioned to produce this strategy.
Hilary.
Good afternoon, Hilary Thompson. I'm chair of Third Sector Leaders in Kirklees, and know most people on this call because I've been in Kirklees too long.
And Vina.
Hi everyone, Vina Randauer. I'm a democracy manager for the Democracy and Place-Based Working Service, and I've been working alongside Noreen and Helen to develop the strategy.
We do have a presentation if you'd like us to.
Yes, please, if you could do that, share that, please.
Thank you. Sheila, have you got that to share?
It's just opening up now, hopefully.
Thank you. Sheila, if you're having trouble, shall I share myself?
I think it's just loading. It's just been a bit slow. Just
right.
There we go. Can everybody see that now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So the presentation is on the development of the voluntary and community sector and social enterprise investment strategy. If we move to the second slide, please, Sheila. Thank you. So as I inferred previously, this is a joint piece of work commissioned by Kirklees Council and Third Sector Leaders, very much building on the work that has happened via the coordinated community response during the COVID pandemic and subsequently, where the sector worked alongside the council, health and local businesses to support local people. So it is a recognition of the values and the strengths of the sector, and the acknowledgement that sometimes the voluntary and community and social enterprise are best placed to support and enable local communities. The strategy is about more than just funding, however. It is about investing time, skills, assets and greater understanding between the sectors. I'm going to hand over to Diane now on the third slide, who will explain the approach that we took when we set about going through this work. Thanks, Diane.
We just wanted to briefly mention that we are working alongside shared values because they've got particular resonance for this work and how it's developed. So those values were developed by partners in health, the voluntary sector and the council, and again as a reflection on time together so far during COVID and the good relationships built during that time, and trying to define how we would like to use those as principles for working forwards, really. So we are working alongside is a really simple statement of shared values that's come through that co-creation process. It includes things like enabling whoever's best placed to do something to do it, and things around growing trust, and it's intended to act kind of as a conversation starter and a litmus test. So I think that can be used in practical everyday work of saying, actually, is what we're doing consistent with those ways we've said we want to work together? And we mentioned this today because particularly I think the way in which the strategy has been developed has used those principles, and that's had an influence on what's come through as part of the strategy in terms of the content of it, really. So it's the most significant use of those values so far. I'm just going to hand over to Helen now, who's going to tell you about the strategy development.
Okay, do you want to move on to the next slide? Thank you. So our approach with regards to the strategy involved having one-to-one and group conversations with a wide variety of individuals from both voluntary community sector and social enterprises and council staff and teams. Those conversations were held over January to March this year, typically lasted about an hour to an hour and a half, and covered a range of topics such as funding, how organisations work with local business, if they work with local business, building space, asset transfers, the skills that they need, any gaps, and the general resilience and sustainability of their organisations. It's probably worth me mentioning at this point that they were fantastic conversations. They were, with everybody that I spoke to, everyone was so open, very sharing, very honest. There was a lot of great conversation. And it very much felt from that perspective like the right time to be having those conversations and to build on that good work that the sector had done, especially throughout the first part of that COVID pandemic and the coordinated response work. Next slide, please. In terms of who I spoke to, I tried to be as varied in terms of the size of organisation, the services, the type of organisation, the areas. This is a split based on locality. And we do recognise that there is a very strong South Kirklees bias here, but it's probably worth noting, and I'll come on to it later in the slides as well, that as we go through the actions within the strategy, we anticipate doing a lot more engagement as well with the sector on specific topics. So community buildings is one that we've got out at the moment, but we do recognise that there are real areas of interest for some organisations, and we'll focus down as we get into the detail. So the engagement is very much an ongoing process. Next slide, please. From those conversations with the organisations and the council teams, there were a number of key themes that came through. The most dominant one of these, without a shadow of a doubt, and probably came up in the majority of conversations, and probably all of them from the sector, was around trust. And trust was a really key word for us, and the need to develop and build on trust as a route to working together and doing more together. There were also comments about focusing on building on existing good work. It doesn't always have to be something new. There's a lot of good work that happens out. Oh, have I lost you? No, sorry, my screen went funny. There's a lot of good work that happens within the sector, and it's about harnessing that and supporting it to continue when it's working. There was also, as you would expect, a lot of conversation about funding, and some of the repetitive conversations that have been going around for years around what are overheads, what is management fee, what's a reasonable percentage, the short-term nature of a lot of the funding, and kind of a recognition that some of the issues that communities face are complex and need longer-term funding and longer-term support. But the sector's also keen to do a lot themselves. We are, by our nature, quite independent, strong-willed. We have a very strong community focus, and we want our own sustainability. So there's also a lot of conversations about how we can build capacity and resilience for ourselves by helping attract more funding into Kirklees. Communication, good communication, I think underpins most successful activity and most successful partnership workingism, and the sector really wanted mechanisms there so they can raise awareness of the work they're doing, but understand more about what's going on in the local area and how we can all work together, and share learning and share stories, what's working, what's not, and genuinely being very open in that communication and building good, strong local partnerships. There's definitely a need to change the narrative around asset transfers. That when you mention it in the sector, it immediately gets translated to asset transfer of liability. And actually, there are examples now, some good asset transfers, but also it's about focusing that work on where the need is, where we really need the community to work together and come together to take ownership of an asset. And finally, it was for the social enterprises that I spoke to, felt there's very little support in place. If you're starting up a social enterprise in Kirklees, it's understanding where to go is really difficult, and there's still very limited understanding of the value that community businesses can bring into Kirklees. Next slide, please. So some of the priorities, or the three key priorities rather, that were developed as a result of this work and reflect those working alongside values, are about investing to build trust and transparency, and that is the building block, I'd say, for the whole strategy, in all honesty, and how we create opportunities to get to know each other better, have open and honest conversations, share problems, and jointly develop solutions at community level. And that includes jointly understanding what funds are available to the sector, how we make the most impact, how we get the most impact from those funds, and how conversations, for example, with procurement can start a lot earlier and in probably a more informal manner before formal processes begun, so that the sector really are involved and information is shared openly as much as possible. The second priority is about investing in whoever is best placed to provide the service. And that's so we recognise and value each other's strengths, and that really aligns to the working alongside values. And we've seen, we know we can do this. We've seen it as part of the coordinated community response work. And that's looking at how we move funding closer to communities, to the communities that need it, how we invest within the assets within those communities, and how we work with social enterprises, and look at how we look within Kirklees first. So look to our VCS and our social enterprise sector first, and that kind of buy local principle, and encouraging more of that. And finally, the third priority then looks at how the council invest to help the sector become more resilient and sustainable. And this goes back to the pride that individuals have in their organisations, and they want to do this. They want to be sustainable. So it's how we can encourage more community businesses. It's how we can develop some very clear funding principles, and how we attract more funding into Kirklees, external sources of funding into Kirklees. Some of what's contained within these priorities is new, but actually most of it is building on what's already there and what's already happening, and doing more of it. Next slide, please. So we've started to look at some of the priorities and how we action plan them and what success would look like. And in doing some of these things, we're hoping that, just some of the ones that we've highlighted here will help. If we can develop an effective grants programme with no duplication, if we can have more active community buildings meeting more community needs, more social enterprises and increased social value into Kirklees, generates more employment, as well as all the benefits that kind of running a community business can bring to all those involved, as well as the community, and how we can work better together, more partnerships, more alliances, and more evidence of these happening. And the next slide, please. So the three areas that as TSL we've been progressing are firstly around community buildings, and so we've issued a survey really to develop a clear understanding of the current situation for a lot of our, and I say community buildings or spaces really, because there's church halls, there's sports clubs, there's a really wide variety of community spaces, and understanding what the current situation is, what the support needs is, and then we can action plan further, whether that's some kind of peer support network, some focus webinars, so that we're making sure that we are meeting the needs of those people that are running community spaces. For social enterprise, we've developed and had the first meeting of a sounding board of local experts and social enterprises themselves. So that consists of representatives from the council, university, Lacala, and local social enterprises themselves to come together and act as a group of individuals who are experts, who are passionate about social enterprises, and could help steer some of that work as to how we do encourage more social enterprises to set up in Kirklees, but also to make sure the sector is sustainable moving forward as well. And then finally, we've had some meetings with procurement within Kirklees Council to look at their social value portal and work with them to see how that will impact on the VCSE and the role that they play in the commissioning process. So if I hand back to Noreen now.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Helen. Should we go to the next slide, please? So yeah, it's just a summary of the next steps and where we go from here, really. So it's continued engagement with the sector. Helen mentioned the community building survey that's out now, and the next steps after that will be the community group survey to talk to organisations that maybe that are operating or starting up again. It's also about agreeing the data that we need to use to quantify the measures of success. I think Helen mentioned that briefly. Further work on the action plan, aiming for the end of March to have a completed action plan. And identify any further resources that may be needed, and the continued work on engagement and communication that we need to do, and that includes the communication with our members continually and how we do that. So that's our presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thank you. So I need to declare an interest that I'm involved in a trust that has an asset transferred building. Okay. So as you can imagine, I do have some particular views on what you've just shared, but I'll open it up to questions first. Does any of the scrutiny panel have any questions they wish to ask at this moment in time, or will I just launch? Okay, so one of my questions is about ownership of the strategy, and the lack of involvement in certain areas in North Kirklees in the discussion groups for the strategy. And I'd like to understand, please, how you feel that groups in North Kirklees will feel that they have some ownership of this strategy, when quite clearly, and certainly in Batley and Spen, quite clearly there is far less engagement happened at an early stage than with more groups in South Kirklees. So I'm wanting to know how you feel that groups in North Kirklees will feel ownership of the strategy.
Helen, shall I take that one?
Yeah, go on, you start there.
Yeah, it's definitely a fair point, Councillor Smage. I think we did open up the opportunity to be involved to a wide variety of people and organisations, and it might have just been timing that people didn't get as involved. I think from my view, perhaps Helen, you could add to it, but my view is that the engagement hasn't stopped yet, that we need to continue that, but that people will get more involved when they're more interested. So I don't know if we didn't hit the right mark when we were having those discussions in January to March. Maybe we need to relook at how we do that. But from my perspective, the engagement hasn't stopped, and it won't stop, and it will continue, and that's how we get wider ownership of the strategy. Helen, do you want to add to that?
Maybe not. Did you advertise it only through third sector leaders?
I think it went out through. I think it went out through a number of through the council channels as well as TSL. To be honest with you, and certainly that some of the events, the People Helping People events, for example, would go out quite widely to some of those smaller organisations. I think there's always a question. There is always a difficulty with some of the smaller organisations about their involvement and the time they have to be involved in work like this, and I accept that. I think there's also been feedback as well. So even if they weren't involved in the initial conversations, we have fed back at members' meetings as well, again through third sector leaders, admittedly, but through members' meetings, so that they've been kept up to date. For example, the themes that were coming through, they were kept aware of those themes. So there is that continuous, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. I was to keep people appraised of kind of where we are with the development of the work.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about wider than Councillor Zaman.
Thank you, Councillor Smage. My question is about the information that you've put out, that the council grant funding opportunities for the VCSE in 2019 and 20 total to approximately 800k. Now, as part of that, you identify that as yet you don't have the data regarding percentage of contracts commissioned to local VCSE, or insight into how this relates to other areas in West Yorkshire. Now, my question is, when is this data going to be available? And particularly in terms of BAME-led organisations, how much of this information is available to them?
some of the work that you seem to be doing is with the same organisations, and we're not far reaching enough. And the information that you've just relayed, again, can you sort of help us understand, help the panel understand how you're going to be able to reach a wider section of the communities if they're not connected to the third sector leaders?
Shall I start that one again? I think there was a number of elements to your question, I think 3, and I'll answer it in 3 parts if that's okay. So the first element around data, which is quite crucial and links back to how we measure success, I guess. I think my answer would be that we're looking at that data at the moment. Certainly, I have my team working on looking at the contracts register to pull out what that looks like. And I am aiming to have all that information, the contracts information, the funding information, and the funding information about local councils before Christmas. That's my aim. The second part of your question was around how do we reach BAME communities? Is that correct? Yep. And Helen, you might want to help me with this, but so far how we've done our engagement is threefold, really. So we have used TSL's contacts, so they have a contact list for their bulletin as well as having social media. We also have the council's community directory links, who we use as contacts, and we have the third sector team contacts. One thing that we will be tapping into as well as that is the contacts that we have through grant funding, which will be quite a useful approach when we do the next step of our engagement, and also our contacts with local councillors, so using the bulletins that go to ward members. But I think that there is an element that we could do more with BAME communities. Helen, do you want to step in?
Yeah, I guess I've been working with on the Community Champions project, and that's had, by the nature of that work, which has been to raise vaccine uptake, we've had a far wider reach into those communities, and I guess a real clear focus. So I think there's, and from that we're getting a much better idea of how we can develop a network and how we can support those organisations further in the work to make sure that they are better represented. So I think that's almost a piece that's happened over the last 6 months since the strategy was written. That's almost starting to happen, really, how we can share more of this information with the groups that we've now found and are talking to through other projects and other grant funding routes.
There certainly needs to be a better understanding of the communities, because when you're looking around, the VCSE sort of organisations, CBSs, with these organisations are well established. There is an awful lot of money that gets invested into this area, and I don't see the level, there's not enough volunteers, there's not enough capacity building, there's not enough sustained organisations. So, year in, year out, you can't be reliant on the council putting the money in, and then there's no sustainability. So I'd like to sort of see more investment in those communities and better sustainable outcomes.
Yeah, and I think in all honesty, I think that's what the sector are wanting to achieve as well. And I think that's probably one of the key things, that they don't want to be reliant on one source of grant funding either. They want to be able to, I guess, be masters of their own destiny and work with their own communities as much as possible.
Councillor Uppal.
Thank you, and thanks for your report and presentation. I think Councillors and Mans kind of covered what I was going to say. I think the point that she was making was about what we, do we have understanding of the makeup of the different voluntary organisations that we work with, and are we able to break it down by understanding? For example, we work with so many BAME-led organisations. We work with, I think you've got some understanding around geography. But it'd be really interesting to understand if we're covering all the different demographics that we've got in Kirklees. And also, I guess it's about expanding that reach, isn't it, as well? So I think there's been some brilliant work definitely around COVID that we can learn from, and we've got some really good trusted relationships with a number of organisations. A lot of them are already known to us. So I guess it's just getting that, what can we do? Because this is potentially a sector that we're talking about trying to increase and expand in Kirklees. And you mentioned in your strategy that you want to do more around social enterprise support as well. So, and I guess you're scoping some of that work out now, aren't you, really? But I think having a real focus on expanding that amongst all the different communities that we've got in Kirklees, because I guess what we want to see is that we've got that voice from all, young, old, in terms of sexuality, in terms of race, everything, because everyone will bring their different voice and dynamics to it, and we're only going to learn from those experiences, aren't we? So I know as an organisation, we want to learn more from lived experience as well, and that means making sure we've got that diversity of organisation, of ownership, and all of that. I think that's just a really important thing going forward. So yeah, just sort of re-emphasising that. Yeah.
Hilary, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I think most of it's been said, but I would just say that we do have a whole variety of people on our board of TSL that are part of these communities and have a role and responsibility. And as TSL and Kirklees and part of West Yorkshire, we've played quite an active part at West Yorkshire level on diversity and equality and inclusion. And that work is growing and growing. So I think it's a movement that's happening. And we are well placed in it, but there's obviously always more that we could do.
Absolutely, and I appreciate there'll be lots going on. I think some of that monitoring of it is quite useful. So I presume you're doing that, and there's a lot about community ownership, isn't there, and about who's leading the organisations, who's making the decisions, and all this sort of stuff. So anything that we can do to sort of, keep an eye on that and diversify it, I guess it does. That's where
Yeah, I agree. It's about different communities, isn't it? It is, yes. Can I ask then as well about the funding, because your report highlights that Kirklees external funding is quite low in relation to other areas, and I'm wondering what you're looking to see needs improving in the future to help organisations apply for or even know about funding externally to Kirklees.
Shall I? Oh, go on then, Noreen. Oh,
no, you can take it.
I think the know about is absolutely critical, and that comes down to communication at all levels. And there are lots of groups that maybe still don't know about different pots of funding. There are a lot of very small pots, there are some larger pots, but actually, even once you know about it, the key thing there is it's the capacity. It's both time, resource and skills to apply for the funding. And you can, a lot of organisations will start at a smaller grant level, but actually sometimes they need that it's the capacity to apply for, say, a national lottery fund that they just don't have, and the time and energy that it can take an organisation, irrespective of size, to apply for one of those large grants is a real challenge. So some of that external bid support, grant support, someone to help write, and we have some of that already in Kirklees, and I think if we had a little bit more, we could do more, because what the VCS do not lack is ideas. They have plenty of ideas on how they can improve and how they can help their communities. And the challenge is to get those ideas onto a piece of paper and that meets the funders' requirements. So it's about capacity ultimately, and bringing that capacity in through external skills support. And hopefully eventually you transfer that knowledge into the organisation so they can do more and more for themselves.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I also wanted to ask about your survey that you've got running at the minute.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask about involvement of ward councillors, because there seems to be very little involvement of ward councillors in this, and ward councillors know all the community organisations in their ward, not just the ones that work with different organisations across Kirklees, but actually all of them. And certainly when I asked for some information for my ward, I found that there was a missing organisation that had not been included, which I will let you know about, Noreen, later. But that just goes to my point, really, that you're surveying across the board, but have you actually talked to ward councillors as to whether there are any areas in their ward that they feel this survey should go to? Vina?
I mean, I think we clearly need to do more work with elected members. We did email all ward members to let them know about the survey and to get the information out. But I acknowledge that, you know, emails don't always get picked up. So I think going forward, there'll be more engagement with members. One of the things that we will be doing as part of the survey with community groups is ensuring that councillors are briefed before that survey goes live so that they're aware of it in advance of it going live. And also an offer has been made to all the group leaders to ask if they and their groups would like a briefing on the development of the strategy and the work that's taken place to date. So it's a valid point, and we will be doing more to engage with members throughout the process.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the information that went out for councillors to put it out on social media and everything, but it didn't give me information as to who in my ward was being approached. And this is it's just an example, really, of maybe an ongoing conversation and involvement of ward councillors, so that there's more of a coverage across Kirklees for different engagement. I think that would be helpful in itself. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's one thing that's mentioned on your survey is about a network for community buildings. Now, I understand about the question because there was a network previously for community transfer buildings that has gone now, but it's about sustainability of what you're asking. So you're asking questions about, do different groups need help in different areas, and do they want a network and things like this? But it's about sustainability of these things. So I'm wanting to understand how all of you are looking for sustainability of the work.
Can I take that one up? I think the key question is, do the participants, the people who completed the survey, are they interested in having a network? So if there is an interest, then it's about, like you say, getting information into that network, but it's about peer support. So I worked in an organisation that, for example, we needed a lift. It would have been great if I had had a network of support so I could hear, well, how do you do your 5-year surveys? Who do you talk to? And oh my goodness, I now need a lift. Has anybody experienced this before? So this is about the sector helping itself. This is us sustaining our own network. And I think if Zoom and Teams have taught us anything, it's actually that we can have these meetings relatively easily over, you know, mechanisms like this and or face to face, and have those conversations. So it's about us as a sector helping ourselves to some extent, and then bringing in the experts as and when we need to. And that could be working with local businesses. It could be a building surveyor coming in and talking to us about how you do a building survey. But it's about us raising our own knowledge. And I think that's something that when you're running a building, you need to, you obviously have those responsibilities, but there's so much that you don't know, and where being able to talk to fellow building owners and people who own space would really help. So my view would be that sort of network would become self-sustaining.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions on this? No? Okay, so I think we've picked up about reaching across communities. Yes.
Yeah.
And the better understanding of those communities, and talking to ward councillors, and covering the demographics of communities, and and understanding about funding, how people having somewhere where people can find out about what funding is available, and sustainability of what you're suggesting as far as the strategy and the actions are concerned as well. Okay, have I covered everything that everybody mentioned? Councillor Zaman, have I covered your points that you were raising? Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then just finally, the work programme for members is in the papers. Does anybody have any comments on those? No. The next meeting of the Overview Scrutiny meeting is the 21st of December. I do have to report to the meeting as well that there was, I was notified of an urgent officer delegated decision in relation to the use of the Household Support Fund. The urgent decision was because the funding came in close to the October half term and the money was needed to support free school meal vouchers during school holidays. There is a report going to Cabinet next week about the Household Support Fund. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for this afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.